Officer Rebecca Stanton had dedicated 6 years to the Seattle Police Department, yet only 3 of those years were spent actively on patrol duty. She was recognized by her colleagues for what they termed hypervigilance in medical environments, particularly when responding to calls concerning theft or impersonation. One Wednesday evening at Harborview Medical Center, her inability to look beyond racial prejudice resulted in a substantial financial penalty for the city, amounting to $2.4 million, and the termination of her law enforcement career. A man of color, approximately in his late 30s, Dr. Andre Bennett, was merely traversing the hospital corridor en route to the emergency department where he was employed. He was attired in navy blue scrubs, a white coat bearing his embroidered name, and his hospital identification badge was conspicuously clipped to his chest. There was no infraction, no urgent situation, no behavior suggestive of malfeasance. He was simply a doctor proceeding to his scheduled shift. However, Officer Stanton observed him and made an immediate determination based on ingrained prejudice. She concluded that a black man in medical attire must be posing as a physician. That unfounded assumption precipitated a confrontation that culminated in physical detainment in the presence of patients and staff, a humiliating escorted walk through the hospital, and a federal lawsuit that would illuminate how racial bias operates even in professional settings where identification is clear. Before we proceed, kindly indicate your location of viewership. If this marks your inaugural visit, please avail yourself of the subscribe button. Narratives such as this necessitate dissemination, and your backing assists us in bringing further truth to light. Harborview Medical Center, a prominent healthcare institution situated at the heart of the city, where hundreds of personnel move through its passageways 24 hours a day, where white coats and scrubs are the standard attire, and where identification badges are obligatory and readily visible. The time was 6:45 on a Wednesday evening. The transition of shifts was in progress. The hallways were bustling with nurses, physicians, technicians, and support personnel moving between various departments. Dr. Andre Bennett had served as an attending emergency medicine physician at Harborview Medical Center for 9 years. For 9 years, he had managed conditions ranging from cardiac arrest to critical trauma cases. He had mentored resident physicians. He had published research pertaining to emergency protocols. He had been nominated on 2 occasions for the hospital's esteemed award for excellence in patient care. His colleagues placed their trust in him. His patients lauded his abilities. His superiors regarded him as one of their most dependable medical practitioners. However, on that particular evening, his thoughts were not occupied with accolades or commendations. He was contemplating the backlog of patients awaiting attention in the emergency room, the 2 critical cases that had arrived that afternoon, and whether he would have the opportunity to procure some coffee before the night's demands intensified. Andre had parked his vehicle in the staff parking structure, traversed the elevated walkway connecting the buildings, and was making his way along the main corridor towards the emergency department. He was wearing his customary work attire, navy scrubs, a white coat, a stethoscope draped around his neck, and his hospital identification badge prominently affixed to his chest, clearly displaying his photograph, name, and department: emergency medicine attending physician. He acknowledged nurses whom he recognized with a nod. He offered a wave to a resident he had previously mentored. He was precisely where he was meant to be, engaged in the very task he performed during every shift. Yet to Officer Rebecca Stanton, none of this registered. Rebecca Stanton had joined the Seattle Police Department 6 years prior, following a 3-year tenure as a private security guard. Her instructors at the academy had noted her eagerness, but also her propensity to escalate minor incidents. She had spent her initial 3 years with the department in community outreach capacities and administrative roles, work that kept her away from street patrol, while supervisors assessed her judgment. When she eventually transitioned to patrol duties, her performance evaluations yielded mixed results. She was diligent and thorough, but also quick to assume the worst. In her 3 years on patrol, Stanton had accumulated 7 formal complaints. 5 of these involved individuals of color who were stopped or detained in professional environments where their presence was clearly warranted. One such complaint was from a black attorney detained at the courthouse, accused of attempting to access a restricted area despite displaying a bar association badge. Another involved a Latino chef questioned at his own restaurant after a patron mistook him for a delivery person. An Asian physician was stopped in a hospital parking garage and asked to prove his authorization to park there. A black businesswoman was detained at an office building accused of trespassing despite possessing a key card and company identification. Each complaint had undergone review. Each complaint had been closed with standard phrasing. Officer acted within discretion. Insufficient evidence of bias. Recommend additional training on cultural competency. Stanton had attended the mandated training sessions. She had fulfilled the requirements. She had participated in the workshops. And subsequently, she continued to perceive criminality in professional settings, persisted in questioning credentials that should have been sufficient, and maintained the assumption that individuals of color in positions of authority must be deceptive. On that particular Wednesday evening, Stanton was assigned to a hospital patrol detail. Seattle General had been experiencing issues with instances of theft, unauthorized individuals entering restricted zones, and occasional disturbances within the emergency department. The hospital had contracted with the police department to provide an increased presence during evening shifts. Stanton had been walking through the main corridor when a nurse, a young white woman named Brittany Matthews, informed her that she had observed someone unfamiliar near the medication storage area earlier. "Did they have identification?" Stanton inquired. "I believe so," Brittany responded, "but I wasn't certain. They seemed like they might be new." "What was their appearance?" "A black man, wearing scrubs." "I'm uncertain. Perhaps I'm being overly cautious." "It's better to be safe than sorry," Stanton stated. "I will remain vigilant." And there it was, the seed of suspicion planted, the inclination to doubt activated. When Stanton encountered Andre moments later, walking down the corridor, her mind completed the narrative. A black man in scrubs could be impersonating staff. He might be attempting to steal medication. An investigation is necessary. It mattered not that Andre's identification was visible. It mattered not that he was clearly at ease in the environment, greeting staff, moving with the confidence of someone who belonged. It mattered not that numerous other staff members were navigating the same corridors in comparable attire without being questioned. Stanton perceived what she had been conditioned to see, a black man requiring verification. She quickened her pace to intercept him. "Do you believe hospitals require specific protocols to prevent staff from being subjected to racial profiling by security personnel? Please share your thoughts in the comment section below." Andre was nearing the entrance to the emergency department when he heard footsteps approaching from behind and a voice calling out, "Sir, excuse me, sir." He turned, anticipating a medical emergency. Upon seeing the police officer, his mindset immediately shifted to a professional mode. "What is the nature of the emergency?" he inquired. Stanton advanced, her hand resting near her duty belt. "I require you to present identification." Andre's eyebrows lifted slightly. He had experienced variations of this scenario previously, typically in parking areas or elevators, but never in a hospital corridor during a shift. He gestured to his chest where his badge was conspicuously displayed. "My hospital identification is located here," he stated. "Dr. Andre Bennett, emergency medicine." Stanton offered it barely a glance. "I need to see a driver's license or a state-issued identification." Andre felt the familiar burden of his frustration. "May I inquire as to the reason for this? I am on my way to my shift." "We have received reports of unauthorized individuals within the hospital. I need to confirm your identity." Andre's focus shifted from his previous thoughts. He slowly withdrew his wallet, extracted his driver's license and medical license, and presented them. "My driver's license, my medical license, my hospital ID badge, all bearing my name and photograph. Now may I proceed to perform my duties?" Stanton accepted them, examining them with evident skepticism, then looked back at him. These could be fabricated. Andre stared at her, incredulous. "Fabricated? You believe someone created counterfeit medical licenses and hospital identification badges solely to wander around in scrubs?" "Individuals impersonate medical staff regularly." "Not with 3 forms of identification." Andre gestured around the hallway. "Inquire with anyone here. Speak with the nurses. Speak with security. I have been employed here for 9 years." Stanton's expression remained unchanged. "That is irrelevant. You are accompanying me for verification." Andre's voice escalated slightly, his frustration becoming evident. "I am a physician. I work here. My hospital identification is visibly displayed." Stanton's tone adopted a cold, dismissive quality. "Buddy, at this point, your status is immaterial. You are accompanying me." The words lingered in the air. "At this juncture, I hold no regard for your credentials, your badge, or the verification you claimed was necessary." Her decision had already been made. Andre looked directly at her, his voice steady yet pointed. "Is my ethnicity the reason you are disinclined to examine my badge?" Stanton's facial expression shifted subtly. Not with shame, nor with a desire for reconsideration, but with something akin to confirmation. Her voice was cold as she replied, "Perhaps. Proceed to turn around slowly and place your hands behind your back." Andre surveyed his surroundings. Other staff members were passing by, some casting curious glances. He recognized a few colleagues. He observed their perplexed expressions. The situation was now attracting attention. Several nurses had paused at their workstations observing. The corridor was becoming crowded with onlookers. A resident whom Andre had mentored, a young woman named Dr. Lauren Hayes, approached swiftly, her voice laced with alarm. "Dr. Bennett, what is occurring?" Stanton produced her handcuffs, her movements deliberate. "Ma'am, please step aside. This does not concern you." "He is an attending physician," Dr. Hayes stated firmly, her voice rising with disbelief. "I work alongside him. You cannot simply place him in handcuffs without justification." Stanton's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, I must insist you step away." "Doctor," Hayes remained stationary. "This is preposterous. He's wearing his hospital identification. His name is visible on his coat. What precisely are you doing?" Deshaun Mitchell, the security supervisor, an older black man who had been employed at the hospital for 15 years, approached with haste. "Officer, that is Dr. Bennett. He has been working here since before I began my employment. What is the issue?" Stanton was now surrounded by individuals vouching for Andre. Her initial assumption was crumbling under the weight of evidence she had refused to acknowledge from the outset. However, instead of retreating, instead of offering an apology, she proceeded with her intended action. "Turn around," she reiterated, her voice now more forceful. The corridor fell into silence. Nurses halted mid-stride. Other physicians ceased their conversations. All eyes were on Officer Rebecca Stanton as she approached Dr. Andre Bennett with handcuffs. Andre observed the faces around him, his colleagues, his staff, individuals with whom he interacted daily, now witnessing him being treated as a suspect based solely on Officer Stanton's admission. She had stated, "Perhaps possibly due to his race, and yet I am proceeding with the handcuffing." He considered his patients in the emergency department, wondering about their doctor's whereabouts. He thought of the medical students who looked up to him, now observing his humiliation. He recalled his parents, who had supported him through medical school and celebrated his appointment to this position, and he thought of every instance where he had been compelled to prove his belonging. Every time his credentials were insufficient, every time his complexion negated his achievements. "I am complying under duress," Andre stated clearly, his voice carrying down the corridor. "I am Dr. Andre Bennett, attending physician in emergency medicine. This is my place of employment. This officer has acknowledged race as a factor in my detention, and everyone present is a witness." He turned around slowly. The click of the handcuffs echoed. A nurse began to weep. Dr. Hayes retrieved her phone and commenced recording. Deshaun Mitchell, the security supervisor, immediately radioed for the hospital administrator on duty. Stanton escorted Andre down the corridor towards the security office, one hand on his arm, his hands cuffed behind his back. They passed individuals in the waiting area. They passed visitors. They passed staff members who stopped and stared in astonishment. Dr. Webb, a patient whom Andre had treated the preceding week, called out, "What is happening?" Andre was unable to respond. His throat was constricted with a mixture of rage and humiliation. By the time they reached the security office, the hospital administrator, Patricia Morales, was already present, her face ashen with anger. Upon observing Andre in handcuffs, she turned to Stanton. "What in the world do you believe you're doing? That is Dr. Webb, one of our attending physicians." Stanton stammered. "I was verifying his identity. There was a report of unauthorized individuals." "A report from whom? And even if such a report existed, he is wearing hospital identification. His colleagues vouched for him. On what grounds did you place him in handcuffs?" He was uncooperative. "I was defending my dignity," Andre stated quietly. "I was refusing to be subjected to humiliation for performing my professional duties." Morales pointed at Stanton. "Remove those handcuffs immediately." Stanton hesitated, then unlocked the cuffs. Andre rubbed his wrists, his jaw clenched. "Dr. Webb," Morales said, her voice trembling slightly, "I offer my profound apologies. This should never, under any circumstances, have transpired. We will be lodging a formal complaint with the police department without delay." Andre nodded, but remained silent, attempting to process the violation. The anger, the sheer preposterousness of being apprehended for his ethnicity within his own hospital. A police supervisor arrived within minutes. Lieutenant Vincent Duca, who had collaborated with the hospital for years and was familiar with the staff. He listened to Morales' account, observed the video recorded by Dr. Hayes, and briefly conferred with the witnesses still gathered in the corridor. He then addressed Stanton, his demeanor stern. "You detained a physician in their workplace while they were wearing complete identification, with multiple witnesses confirming their identity." Stanton's voice was subdued. "I was investigating a report." "What report?" "Provide the incident number. Show me the dispatch record." "There was no formal report," Stanton admitted. "A nurse mentioned seeing someone she didn't recognize." Duca closed his eyes momentarily, visibly struggling to contain his anger. "You apprehended a doctor based on a nurse's observation. Not someone committing theft, not someone posing a threat, but someone she didn't recognize. Do you comprehend the gravity of your actions?" Stanton offered no response. Duca turned to Andre. "Dr. Webb, you have my sincerest apologies. This was entirely unacceptable. You will have access to all reports, video footage, and body camera recordings. And I can assure you, Officer Stanton will no longer be assigned to this hospital or any other facility." He turned back to Stanton. "Surrender your badge and weapon. Your duty for tonight has concluded." Stanton handed them over, her hands trembling. Should officers face immediate suspension after detaining any professional in their workplace without cause? Please share your thoughts. By the following morning, the incident had become common knowledge throughout the entire hospital. By midday, it had reached the local news outlets. By evening, it had gained national attention. The video footage from Dr. Hayes' phone depicted the entire encounter. Andre being questioned despite evident identification. Colleagues vouching for him. Stanton proceeding with handcuffing him regardless. The escorted walk through the hospital corridors. A black doctor was handcuffed at their own medical facility. A physician was detained while en route to an emergency department shift. A Seattle police officer arrested a doctor despite hospital identification and witness corroboration. The Seattle Police Department issued an immediate statement condemning the detention. The hospital released a public apology. The medical community erupted in outrage. Physicians across the country shared their own experiences of being profiled in professional settings, of having their credentials challenged, of being mistaken for janitorial staff, orderlies, or security guards rather than physicians. Civil rights attorneys contacted Andre within hours. This was not merely an instance of unlawful detention, it was a manifestation of the persistent assumption that black professionals, irrespective of their qualifications, must perpetually validate their legitimacy in ways that white professionals never encounter. The lawsuit named Officer Rebecca Stanton, Lieutenant Duca, and the Seattle Police Department. The allegations were clear and damning. unlawful detention without sufficient cause, racial profiling within a professional environment, infringement of civil rights, intentional infliction of emotional distress, false imprisonment, and a failure to adequately train officers on implicit bias within professional settings. The city's legal representatives reviewed the case and immediately recognized its indefensibility. Body camera footage and civilian video evidence provided irrefutable proof. Stanton's questioning of Andre, despite visible identification, colleagues confirming his identity, Stanton's decision to handcuff him nonetheless, and the subsequent walk through the hospital in handcuffs while patients and staff observed. The city reached a settlement within 7 months, amounting to $2.4 million. Andre allocated a portion of this sum to organizations dedicated to promoting equity in healthcare and police accountability. Officer Rebecca Stanton was dismissed 9 weeks after the incident. Her termination letter was unequivocal. Officer Stanton engaged in racial profiling and the unlawful detention of a medical professional within their place of employment. Despite clear identification and corroboration from multiple witnesses, she handcuffed and detained Dr. Webb without justification. Her actions constituted a violation of departmental policy, state law, and federal civil rights protections. Her employment is terminated immediately. Stanton's name was entered into the National Decertification Index, permanently ending her law enforcement career. She attempted to appeal, but the union withdrew its support once the medical community submitted formal complaints and the video evidence became public. Stanton issued a brief statement. "I made a grave error in judgment. I failed to adequately assess the situation and caused harm to Dr. Webb and the hospital community. I accept full responsibility." No one was swayed. The Seattle Police Department faced intense scrutiny. How had Stanton, with 7 prior complaints involving racial profiling of professionals, remained on patrol? Why had supervisors overlooked this pattern? What training was in place to prevent officers from challenging clearly identified professionals? Internal Affairs initiated a comprehensive review. The findings were predictable, complaints were filed but minimized, training was completed but proved ineffective, supervisors avoided confronting uncomfortable realities concerning implicit bias. Officers attended diversity workshops only to return to patrol with their pre-existing assumptions intact. Reforms were announced. Mandatory implicit bias training specifically tailored for professional settings, real-time review of all detentions occurring in hospitals, schools, and corporate environments, a dedicated oversight unit for discrimination complaints, and community advisory boards endowed with enforcement authority. Dr. Andre Bennett did not aspire to be an advocate, but the circumstances necessitated it. He testified at city council hearings. He delivered addresses at medical conferences. He granted interviews discussing the intersection of healthcare, race, and policing. His message was consistent. "I pursued medical education. I completed my residency. I've been practicing emergency medicine for 9 years. I have saved lives. I've instructed students. I've earned every credential displayed on my badge, and yet none of that protected me from being handcuffed in my own hospital because an officer could not accept that a black man could be a doctor." He paused during one particularly challenging interview, his voice thick with emotion. "My patients witnessed me in restraints. My students observed me being treated as a wrongdoer. My professional peers were forced to see me disgraced. And all of this transpired because Officer Stanton's preconceived notions about who was qualified to practice medicine outweighed the undeniable proof presented right before her." The interviewer was left without an answer. This wasn't merely an unfortunate detainment. It served as a stark demonstration of how prejudice based on race operates, even when qualifications are irrefutable. Even when identification is clearly displayed, even when multiple individuals corroborate the person's identity. Officer Rebecca Stanton did not perceive a medical practitioner. She saw a black man in a professional setting and wrongly concluded he must be deceitful, must be an imposter, must be engaged in illicit activity. She was incapable of conceiving that a black man could be a senior attending physician. She could not fathom that his presence clad in a lab coat was legitimate. She was unable to comprehend that her internal depiction of what a doctor should look like might be influenced by racial prejudice rather than objective truth. Her ingrained bias was so profound that she disregarded the hospital identification, dismissed the confirmation from her colleagues, and placed handcuffs on a physician in the presence of his patients. All of this occurred because her assumptions held more sway than the established facts. Systemic racial discrimination within law enforcement infiltrates every environment, including medical facilities, where credentials ought to be beyond reproach. It manifests as the presumption that black professionals are inherently suspect. It is the unwillingness to acknowledge accomplishments when they deviate from established stereotypes. It is the misuse of police authority to dictate who is entitled to positions of esteem and who is not. Rebecca Stanton's professional career has reached its end. That is justice. The city disbursed $2.4 million. That represents accountability. However, financial compensation and dismissals do not mend the emotional distress. They do not erase the memory of being restrained at one's place of employment. They do not reinstate the dignity that was violated in front of colleagues and patients. The fundamental question that arises is, what transformative actions will follow? Will law enforcement agencies finally grasp that racial profiling occurs in executive suites and healthcare settings, not solely on public thoroughfares? Will they finally implement training for officers to recognize that qualifications are valid irrespective of the individual possessing them? Will they finally concede that questioning clearly identified professionals is not an act of diligence, but rather a form of discrimination? Because if we fail to rectify the system that allowed Rebecca Stanton to be present in a hospital with 7 documented complaints and no consequences, if we do not address the prejudice that led her to perceived deception instead of accomplishment, then we are merely awaiting the arrival of the next officer, the subsequent victim, the next physician who is compelled to validate his rightful place in his own professional environment. Offer your input if this ought to be a mandatory requirement. Any detention of a professionally credentialed individual within their workspace will initiate an automatic review and suspension pending the outcome of an investigation. And if you believe these narratives are significant, if you believe that professionals of color are entitled to work without being perceived as suspects, then please press that subscription button, as we are committed to continuing to expose these recurring patterns. We will persevere in demanding positive change. We will persist in advocating for individuals who have rightfully earned their positions and should not be required to justify themselves to prejudiced officers. This situation transcends a single officer or a single doctor. It encompasses all of us and the assumptions we are prepared to challenge or the biases we are willing to perpetuate.